Welcome to Study Session 5, Game and Bargaining Theory. Introduction. In this study session, we will provide answers to why countries engage in lengthy wars when the two sides would be better off if they could settle their disputes without conflict. We will use game theory and bargaining in understanding outcomes of conflict. Learning outcomes. 1. Explain the concept of game theory. 2. Identify the three cardinal principles that underlie the game theory. 3. Discuss Thomas Schelling's bargaining theoretical approach to the study of international conflict. Game theory. Game theory is a strategic approach to the study of international conflict. It is based on an abstract form of reasoning arising from a combination of mathematics and logic. This approach is applied to international relations in order to avoid conflict. Game theory is based on the assumption that human beings are rational, that is, behaving rationally in conflict would maximize one's chances of winning. Game theory not only provides a way to represent strategic interactions between players, it is also a way of analyzing their interactions in order to predict an outcome. Game theory, as Morgan, 1984, succinctly put it, game theory not only provides a way to represent strategic interactions between players, it is also a way of analyzing their interactions in order to predict an outcome. Game theory, as Morgan, 1984, succinctly put it, when each participant or player seeks to maximize gains or maximize losses. Cardinal principles of game theory. It is very important for students of international politics to note that there are three cardinal principles that underlie the game theory. These are: each player is fully rational and is capable of working out any required length, the logical consequences of his and other players' decisions, that is, the ability to anticipate what other opponents want to do based on the fact that each player is rational. Each player has full knowledge of the matrix, that is, each player knows how to attack the other fellow, which means that the strategies that are available to the whole players and the corresponding payoffs are known. Each player can act to maximize its payoffs in the knowledge that the other fellow is doing so too. From these three general principles, we conceived some notions of rules. Students are to take note that the concept employed in the game theory has an intuitive meaning for the various kinds of contest or conflict in international politics. In illustrating the principles of game theory, let us examine the issue of embargo and arms race within the context of international relations. In the embargo scenario, each state must choose independently whether or not to embargo the other's goods. Analyzing this matrix, we see that neither state will choose to impose an embargo. Imposing an embargo will be more costly for each player, and for one player to support the embargo, which the other does not, brings about significant differential rewards, upsetting the power relationships. In the arms race, both states will choose to arm. The very worst outcome will be for one state to arm and the other not to arm, and the very best outcome will be for both to stop. Essentially, there are advantages of using game theory as a simplification of the complex choices states make. Game theory forces both analysts and policymakers systemically to examine assumptions, helping to clarify the choices available and offering possibilities that may not have been explored. In addition, game theory helps the analysts and policymakers to see not just their own state's position, but also where the other state might stand. In essence, the focus of game theory approach is on rational choices and conflict resolution. The choices are either limited or unlimited. Therefore, the ambition of each player in the game is to minimize losses and maximize gain, which in game theoretic terms are referred to as payoffs. The players are expected to be guided by rational calculations, and in most cases, advocates of this approach view international relations as an n-person non-zero-sum game. What this implies is that a gain by one state or party is not necessarily at the expense of others. It is not the winner takes all that characterizes the zero-sum game. Thomas Schelling's bargaining theory. Thomas Schelling is a leading proponent of theory of bargaining. His perception is located within the game theoretical framework. He started off like Morgenthau as an economist using the economic perspective to examine social phenomena. Schelling moved on from there to focus on the process and pattern of bargaining which takes place in human society. There is in his work a combination of socio-psychological as well as logical strategic approaches to the issue or subject of bargaining, particularly conflict, as issue dominating human relations as well as interaction among nation states. He viewed conflict as not necessarily the opposition of hostile forces, but rather as a more complex and delicate phenomenon in which antagonism and cooperation often subtly interact in the adversary relationship. His theory seeks to make use of game theory, organization and communication theory, and theory of evidence, choice and collective decision. This strategic theory, according to Schelling, takes conflict for granted, but also assumes common interest between the adversaries. It assumes a rational, value-maximizing mode of behavior, and it focuses on the fact that each participant's best choice of action depends on what he expects the other to do, and the strategic behavior is concerned with influencing another's choice by working on his expectation on how one's own behavior is related to his. We could infer from the above that Schelling is mainly interested in the conduct of negotiation, the maintenance of credible deterrence, the making of threats and promises, bluffing, double-crossing, and waging in some limited wars when it becomes absolutely necessary. It also involves the formulation of certain defense or arms control policy. We could further deduce from his writing that in most international strategic instances, the notion of a zero-sum game is irrelevant. The former superpowers, in his view, cannot rationally suppose themselves to be engaged in a zero-sum rivalry that could be played out to the bitter end of a full-scale nuclear exchange. According to Schelling, what we have is devotion to national analysis of irrationality of actions. We get from this what he referred to as the theory of interdependent decision, in which one position is dependent upon the other, and any action that could be taken in respect to a particular issue will have to be considered in relation to some other issues. Similarly, there is the argument put forward by Schelling that the use of violence as a way of getting some individual or nation to take certain action could be regarded to what could be considered the cost and benefit of such decision. Hence, rather than going into full-scale war, Schelling argued, nations would tend to consider the risk and therefore strategically bargain and negotiate. He also uses some kind of quantitative utility scale to assess and determine the role of rational behavior of each party to any particular conflict. Thus, Schelling suggests that the dynamic nature of international system makes it necessary to consider at any given time the essence of motivational dialectics, which are crucial to rational behavior of each party in a given situation. He goes on to argue that it is not a universal advantage in a situation of conflict to be in an enabling or invariably and manifestly rational in decision making. In other words, the motivation is not necessarily to be assumed as rational, but the rational decision that is ultimately taken is motivated by some careful calculation which in the final analysis will lead to the desired goals. he uses an example, cases of threat, extortion, and the circumstances under which these take place. When they take place according to him, they are considered by both rationality and irrationality, depending upon the extent and amount of calculation which your party brings to bear on them before action is taken. The central argument in Shelley's work is that bargaining and negotiation are two dimensions to conflict. Quite obviously, it is a matter of fact that in any conflict situation, it requires that one enter into bargaining. The bargaining process is predicated upon some degree of power parity or relative strength in which there is mutual admission of some degree of capability. It is this scenario that conditions the motivation for bargaining. There are a number of hypotheses that are associated with bargaining process. They are: each party at the bargaining table makes effort to extract the highest possible advantage from the opponent. Each negotiator in the bargaining process strives to deny the opponent of relative advantage. The chances or potentials for yielding is dependent upon the perception of the other's capability, capacity, and potential. The extent to which negotiations are successful are determined by both with the capacity to bargain by the parties as well as the effectiveness of the machinery for implementing the decision reached at the bargaining table. One other factor which Shelley suggests would be an advantage to any party for any conflict is the availability of relevant information. When information is available and relevant, it is most likely to be of strategic advantages. Also, when information is reliable, it could also be used as a source of power and power equation within those that are involved in particular conflict. These two towns are logically connected by a major bridge. Any calculation involving dealing with these two towns must necessarily factor in those information that are vital to what the towns represented. Arising from the above, any bargainer must have all necessary information concerning his own position on his government or institution, as well as information about the strength and the weaknesses of the adversary. That is, he should know when to put forward on a particular issue and how best to prevent the adversary from taking his position on a given issue at a particular stage of bargaining and negotiation. In the process of negotiation, information represents an important factor among the element of strength of an effective bargainer. Under unusual circumstances, there may be need to inject some distraction into bargaining and negotiation in order to weaken the position of the adversary or make it impossible to take the advantage of the situation. Thus, the major objective in bargaining Shelley constantly emphasized on is for each party to make commitments, threats, and promises credible to other party so that each party cannot conclude that the other party is bluffing. It is generally to be expected that negotiation would yield when the alternative courses of action represent a higher stake in relation to the courses proposed or put across by the adversary. Put simply, competitors could only bargain effectively from a position of strength, and strength in this regard entails essential resources that constitute the power of a nation, state, or an institution. Finally, In determining what model to adopt in handling a conflict situation or in resolving a conflict, the model should take into consideration the basic issues at stake, the historical factors, the social forces, the economic underpinning, and the political implication. It is when all these are considered that we can bargain or negotiate effectively. Summary of study session. In this study session, you learned that the theory of international bargaining is an application of the theory of games to international negotiations. Game theory is considered as a useful decision-making tool that is quite relevant to all aspects of human life, so long as there exists a conflict situation which requires decision-making, bargaining, deterrence, and diplomacy. The theory enables decision-makers to make the right choice of strategy in order to maximize gains at the lowest cost or to achieve a given objective in the face of opposition. Thomas Schelling is a leading proponent of theory of bargaining. His perception relied on game theory, communication and organization theory based on decision-making informed by calculated choices. We have come to the end of study session 5. Thank you.